Here to discuss this and other climate news of the week is Casey Crownhard, Senior Climate Reporter for MIT Technology Review in New York. Casey, welcome back to Science Friday.
Thanks, always so wonderful to be here.
Tell us about this flood. What happened?
Yeah, so like you said, this was a pretty big glacial flood in Alaska. This is kind of becoming more common because of climate change. Basically what happens is as glaciers melt, they often kind of retreat uphill and they leave behind these glacial lakes, which are these lakes of glacial meltwater, and they often have walls made of like loose dirt and rock and ice. And those can break, which sends water downhill sometimes pretty quickly. Since 1990, the number and area and volume of these lakes around the world have all grown by about 50%. So we're seeing more of this as the climate warms up. Also, like you mentioned, the good news is that this community was pretty prepared for this. So while we did see record-breaking floods, there was very little damage and very little by way of rescue efforts needed.
When you say it was prepared, what do you mean by that?
Yeah, so this has become an issue in this area pretty much every year since 2011. They've seen that this glacier causes flooding like this. It has gotten worse in recent years, but the local officials have been able to kind of keep an eye on this lake, use weather data, monitor it closely, so they kind of have a good idea of when this is going to happen. And so the community has installed a lot of flood protections to help, so that there's a lot of pesco barriers that they put out this year. So those are kind of cloth bags with sand or dirt and reinforced that can help with flood control. And so that's really a big reason why the flooding did cause more damage than it did.
And these glacial lakes are increasing in size, right? I mean, all over the world we have them.
Absolutely. So, I mean, the number of these lakes, the size of them, and just how many there are around the world have all been going up since in the last few decades, according to a recent study. So we're going to see more flooding like this around the world because of climate change.
Has Juneau thought about creating a dam for the lake?
There's talk of putting more kind of permanent flood barriers in. These HESCO barriers are a really good kind of temporary solution, but it's a lot of work to put them up and take them down every time. So that's something that they're definitely looking into because it's basically an annual problem at this point.
And covering your wide world of climate change, I know that EVs have been in your sights, and they have been a target for the Trump administration. What happened in the last few months? Not good news for EVs.
Yeah, it's been quite the year to be covering electric vehicles for sure. So what we've seen this year is this pretty dramatic shift in what policy looks like in the US for EVs. So one of the biggest things is people might remember that there are tax credits in place right now up to $7,500 for people looking to buy new electric vehicles. Those now expire at the end of September. Originally, they were designed to go out, for years. The federal government, with new legislation, rolled those back. The EPA is proposing a rollback of tailpipe rules. Basically, those are the regulation that makes automakers produce vehicles that don't, produce as much pollution. And so we're just seeing, from regulations to this kind of public support, just a really dramatic reversal, a lot of rollbacks in support for electric vehicles in particular.
Mm-hmm. So EVs are going to lose the tax credit. I guess there's worry that the whole EV market may be in jeopardy.
There's definitely a lot of worry, and I honestly think we're starting to see the early signs of that. When all of these tax credits and supports and regulations were in place last year, some estimates predicted that electric vehicles would make up half of new vehicle sales in the US by 2030. Now, a lot of those estimates are more like 25%, so a pretty dramatic change. And actually, in the second quarter of this year, so from April to June, there were fewer new EVs sold in the US compared to the same period last year. And so in a time where we have pretty much only seen electric vehicle sales growing, that contraction in the US is pretty dramatic.
Yeah, you see in the US, because around the world they're selling like hotcakes.
Absolutely. China is like right about to hit that 50% mark for electric vehicle sales, which is pretty wild.
Yeah, it is. But despite all of this here, Ford recently doubled down on its EV manufacturing. What's the company working on?
Yeah, so the company announced on Monday that they have plans for a new affordable electric truck. The company says that it'll start at around $30,000, and they plan to deliver in 2027. kind of around that announcement, they also said they have this new manufacturing process. Basically, they're trying to make a shared platform, this set of kind of parts and procedures, so that they can make, you know, this truck, other trucks, SUVs,
Right.
and do it more cheaply and more efficiently.
Now Henry Ford invented the assembly line back in the Model T age. They're reinventing the assembly line, are they not?
Yeah, they're calling it the assembly tree. So the idea is that they have a couple of different lines on the floor. So, you know, you make like the cab in one part, the back of the truck in another part, and then those will kind of come together later on in the factory so that you can, again, kind of make these vehicles more efficiently. The company is saying that this is going to be, you know, something that really helps them with their EV sales.
Mm-hmm. And of course, part of EVs, the big part of EVs, so probably half the value are the batteries. And the batteries are a huge part of the clean energy transition. And you recently reported on a startup that's using Earth as a giant battery, right?
Yeah.
Tell me about that, yeah.
A very different sort of battery. So there's this Texas-based startup called QuidNet that recently showed that it can store energy in the earth for months at a time. And basically they do this by pumping water underground. One of the most common ways to store electricity today is pumped hydropower. It's a very old method of storing energy. You know, when electricity is available, you pump water uphill, and then when you want that electricity back, you allow the water to flow downhill and through a turbine to generate the electricity again. This is the same kind of idea, just kind of flipped upside down. So you can just pump water down, and then when you want electricity, you allow it to come back up. It gives you more flexibility of where you would put this sort of equipment.
Wow.
Yeah, it's really interesting. The company just completed a 6-month test that showed that they were able to store energy for that long and not lose any of it.
And this was really an important amount of energy, not just a few watts?
It's I would say kind of still on the pilot scale for sure. So they discharged 35 megawatt hours of energy. That would be, you know, about 1,000 households worth of electricity for a day. You know, really big battery storage facilities are, you know, tens or hundreds of times bigger than this. But for a pilot phase, it's pretty interesting. One big caveat is that they still need to build all of the equipment to turn that pressurized water back into electricity. That should come online in early 2026.
Details. So it could be scalable, but right now it's not replacing those old batteries.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that, you know, when it comes to energy storage, I think the more solutions, the better. There will be, you know, kind of maybe batteries will work for one kind of area or one application, and this might work somewhere else. It's not going to replace batteries by any means.
Yeah, well, speaking of batteries, I understand that New York City is testing portable home batteries during these hot summer months for air conditioners. Can that work?
Mm-hmm.
What's going on here?
Yeah, so folks, you know, in New York or wherever you are might get a text from, you know, your utility on these hot days saying, hey, can you turn your air conditioner down? And so to help this, there's this new pilot program called Responsible Grid, where basically what they're doing is giving residents a small battery about the size of a microwave that they can plug their AC unit into. And the company controls this kind of remotely via software. And so when demand is really high on the grid and it's really stressed and we're really working at our limits, you can run your AC off the battery instead. And you can get paid to do it. Right now it's a really small program, but this kind of idea of trying to shave off demand at those really high peaks is getting really popular. And there's, I would say, a growing number of programs trying to do things like this.
Yeah, it sounds like a sort of a take on people who have solar panels and charge their battery up to become part of the grid. This is a little different.
Absolutely. And this kind of, whether it's like that, like solar panels in the batteries, or this kind of program, this kind of distributed model is really interesting because, you know, we could put these big batteries, whether it's, you know, the earth battery or more typical battery storage solutions on the grid, but it can take a long time to build those. It can take a long time to get permits. So this is kind of a way to get around that. You can, you know, do a lot of these little projects instead.
Before we go, well, I want to talk about nuclear power. We know that France really has lots of nuclear power plants, but a plant in France was shut down by a swarm of jellyfish.
Yes, this was a pretty wild story this week. So a major nuclear plant in France had to shut down. They had 4 reactors shut down between Sunday night and Monday morning after jellyfish appeared in their cooling system. So a lot of nuclear power plants will use either like seawater or water from a river to help cool down the reactors. And in this case, it seems like the jellyfish kind of got by the screens that are designed to keep, animals from ending up in these facilities. And so these reactors all had to shut down.
Oh, so this is not some out of a movie thing. We had the attack of the giant jellyfish, right?
No worries about them being like radioactive or anything. It's in the non-nuclear part of the facility.
And why did this happen now?
Yeah, it's a little tough to say, but one thing that we do know is that higher ocean temperatures can be associated with more jellyfish. Overfishing also can lead to more jellyfish because not as many predators. And so we've seen, record-breaking heat waves this year again, especially in Europe. And so some experts say that, because of climate change, we might be seeing more jellyfish and could lead to more problems like this.
Well, we've always heard stories about how fish like to congregate where the water comes out of a power plant because it's a lot warmer. Maybe this is a sort of a case of that.
Yeah, it's really interesting how the nuclear power plant kind of becomes part of the ecosystem almost. I think it's really fascinating.
Well, you've always been fascinating for us, Casey. Thank you for taking time to be with us today.
Thanks so much for having me.
Casey Crownhart, Senior Climate Reporter for MIT Technology Review in New York. We have to take a break, and when we come back, remembering the late astronaut James Lovell, commander of ill-fated, nail-biting Apollo 13. Stay with us. We'll be right back after this short break. More of Science Friday is coming up in just a minute on OPB. Today at noon on Think Out Loud. Earlier this week, the Oregon Governor's Office estimated the state is going to lose more than $15 billion in federal funding for healthcare, food assistance, and other services because of the president's huge policy and tax bill. But also on the list is the Oregon State Library, which will lose roughly a quarter of its yearly budget. We're going to hear what that would mean from the state librarian. That conversation and more today at noon on OPB. If you cannot be with us in the noon hour for Think Out Loud today, you can also catch the rebroadcast of the show tonight and each weeknight at 8. And one great way to make sure that you never miss an episode of Think Out Loud so that you can listen to it as you please is to subscribe to the podcast. You can do that wherever you get your podcasts and other audio. Support for OPB comes from our sustaining members and from AAA, reminding Oregonians it's time to prepare for